multi-axis bowl.
Well, box, sort of, yeah. Really, I do apologize for the video. There's no two ways about it. This is the first time I've recorded video in my workshop, and it's the first time I've edited video anywhere, so it is what it is. Let's see, how do I get you my screen?
Good on the share screen.
Where is that?
If you start moving your mouse.
Oh, there we go. Yep,
yeah.
Got it. Share screen.
Then you have to pick what you want to share.
Well, let's see. First things first. Not the one I'm looking for. I have stills. This is the project that what I'm doing, what I'm demonstrating tonight or showing tonight is based on. This is actually what I've been working on as a commission for a client who wanted something that's very similar to this. This piece is called Hard Landing, which is why the piece that I'm showing tonight is called Hard Landing, the sequel. I did this back in 2013. It's a multi-axis piece, and I will be showing basically, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, I hope you can, the box part, and if we have enough time, I will do the antenna, which is different from this. The goal of my client's commission is to have something that's similar to this, but not identical, and I've actually made some changes. And my client is actually on the Zoom meeting right now. So hello, Charlotte. It's nice to see you. Let's see if I can bring up the other one. No. 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 Let's see. This is the box opened. The equipment I'll be using tonight is, this is my workshop. It's a mess. I have a Jet 16 42 lathe with a 2 horsepower motor. Why can't I switch pictures? Another angle. Oh, and my 2 cameras. I have 2 video cameras over the lathe. This is where the video will be coming from for the demonstration. I'll be using a scroll chuck and a Jacobs chuck at some point. I'm using step centers for the between center work. Close up of my scroll chuck with 25mm jaws. Radius square carbide cutter, circular carbide cutter, long grind bowl gouge, detail grind, spindle gouge, and a parting tool. This is what I'm using. Obviously, if you want to do something like this, use whatever you have that you're comfortable with that will do the job. And now we can go on to the video. There is no sound. I will be talking over this. So first step is this is figured maple blank. All the video pretty much is speeded up fairly dramatically. I do not turn this fast. I am not that good. This is primarily the first thing I want to do is true up the blank. I've got it roughly between centers, and I'm just truing up the edge before I mount it off axis. I want to know what I've got to work with to make the tilted rim. So, and also feel free to jump in with questions if there's anything you want to know about, or if you're bored and want me to skip ahead, that's fine too.
What's the size of the blank?
It's about 6 inches in diameter and a little bit over 2 inches thick. It's figured maple round. obviously you can't see the grain from this angle, but it's actually got quite a pronounced figure. It's a very nice blank. And as I said, I'm just truing it up, just taking off the rough edge. Marking the center of the blank roughly. The piece is called hard landing. It's meant to imply it's had a crash landing. So there's a lot about this that doesn't require stupendous accuracy and precision, which is good. But it does require care and technique. And there's actually a part where you'll see where I screwed up down the road. So,
Joanna, I'm going to ask, I'm guessing that this is dry wood.
yes, it is. I turn primarily dry wood. I get way too obsessed with wet wood all over my lathe and in my shop and everything, and I lose the joy of turning when I'm obsessed about the wet wood. It's a thing. So I've trued up the edge here, and I want to get rid of this dark area. So I'm trying to align I'm going to align the centers so that when I turn the rim, because I'm going to turn the rim first and then turn the central body area. When I turn the rim, I'm going to get rid of a lot of the heartwood or the darker wood. I'm assuming it's heartwood from the blank. And then I'll get rid of pretty much all the rest of it when I turn the central body section. But this means that I need to have the rim up, the bottom of the rim up a little bit higher than the edge of the blank, or the edge of the heartwood, kind of there on the, well, I realize pointing at the screen is kind of useless because you can't see what I'm pointing at. Now basically what I'm doing is I'm marking where I'm going to have the line that I'm going to have my centers on. I've got a homemade center gauge that I've made, and I'm just going to take the line basically all the way around the blank so that I can have the offset in the same direction on both sides. I'm only going to go off axis by about 1/8 of an inch on each side. You really don't need a lot. You don't need to shift the axis a lot to get a fairly substantial variation. And again, I do apologize. This is probably not the best thing you've seen. I haven't seen any of your other demos, but I imagine the video would be better practiced. So now I'm finding the offset that I want. And it's really trial and error. I know it's going to be about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 3/32 of an inch. And I'm just turning the blank by hand to get a sense of where the rim is going to end up.
Do you mark the ice? You said you marked the axis all the way around the block, so you.
Yeah, I did. I basically do little pencil marks. You can see it. Well, there's one right here. Hang on. Let's see if I can bring it back. There's one right there. I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor or not, but there's one
we can.
right there, and a matching one down here. So I don't draw the line all the way across, but I do take the marks all the way across so that I can line up the axes on the faces.
Hey, Jonah, both sides are offset, just
yes.
offset. Okay.
Yes, both sides are offset approximately equally.
Yeah.
I want it to not be tilted on one axis. You have two axes that are tilted like this. I want it to be like an X. You have the two axes cross. So they have to be both offset from center. As I said, this is the offset that I got with, it's probably actually less than 1/8 of an inch off on each side. It's probably closer to maybe even a 1/16. It was very, very slight. And you actually got a fair amount of tip, you know, that's the geometry of the blank and the way it's arranged on the centers. And now I'm just going to mark what my rim is going to look like. And again, I'm trying to get the rim through that big mark that I made for where I want to get rid of the heartwood here, the darker wood. And now all I'm doing is checking to make sure that the offset is roughly the same on both sides. This will tell me how close I am with my centers to being the same on both sides. As I said, this is hard landing, not perfect landing, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want them close just because that's what I want. And now I'm going to mark out, I want the rim edge to be roughly 1/4 of an inch wide. So this will give me something to shoot for. I use the step centers when I turn off axis or multi-axis pieces because the little prongs really do bite into the wood well. I used to, before I got the step centers, I used to use the 4-axis prong centers, and I always had trouble with the piece not holding well when I was turning. And yes, my bearings are shot on my tail center, which is why I used that one for the multi-axis work. I have one that's new that has good bearings in it that I use for straight on spindle work. So again, I'm just marking out my rim here. And I'll basically cut to those lines more or less when I'm taking off the rim section or the wood to get to the rim. Using the long grind bowl gouge, I'm just going to go in, I'm lining up the edge, I'm just going to go in and take off as much as I can. I'll just inch through it and take it off until I get down to the shape that I want. I'll leave enough of the material in the middle to give myself a decent box, but really I just need to get rid of all of this stuff. And I'm very finicky about where I put my tool rest, apparently. This is actually quite interesting for me because I don't normally watch myself work because I don't record myself. So it's actually quite interesting seeing all the little things that I do. So the lathe is going at roughly 650 RPM, something like that. It's not terribly fast. It's fast enough that it's just below wobble level. And I'm just using the lower edge just below the tip of the bowl gouge to come in and take off the extra wood. And you can see it shake a little bit as I'm cutting air. Mostly I'm trying to keep pressure on for the gouge on the tool rest. I'm not driving the gouge into the wood. I'm just trying to ease it in and cut. I want to put the edge where I want to cut. I'm not trying to even ride the bevel or anything. I'm just trying to get the wood where I want to cut from. I saw a demo from Mark Spheri at the first Louisville convention, AAW convention some years ago, 2005, I think, 2006, something like that. And he had a great way of describing it. You put the edge, the bevel where you want to cut. You don't necessarily ride the bevel. You put the bevel where you want it. I'm not paraphrasing it well, but it made a huge difference for how I turn off axis, and I've clearly speeded this up. I've got the handle of the gouge tucked against my right hip, and I'm using my whole body to move the gouge in an arc to take off the wood. Once the initial really outlying parts are gone, the cutting is actually fairly easy. You know, I'm literally just guiding that edge where I want to put it, where I want the cut to be. I use a chip brush to clear the shavings. That's what that little spastic motion was. I find it, if I take the shavings off my tool rest, I am both more comfortable because my hand is there, but also sometimes I find my gouge will slip if it's shaving gets tucked under the shaft of the gouge. So this is sped up by about 2.5 times, I think. It would take a lot longer if I was doing this in person. And again, I'm just inching down to get to the rough rim shape that I want. Reinforcing my rim lines. And again, the pressure here, I've got all the pressure going down on the gouge on the tool rest. I'm using the tool rest and my hand as a pivot. I've got one of my fingers, my ring finger is braced behind the tool rest. And I'm literally just moving my whole body in an arc to make the cut. You know, my hips and my upper body in an arc to make the cut. And now I'm going to shear scrape to refine the curve. I can't get quite the angle that I want, but it's good enough for me to get to do the refining and to get the surface that I want. So I'm using the lower wing of the bowl gouge, obviously, to do the shear scrape. This is a 1/2 inch gouge, by the way. It's I believe the steel is 5/8 of an inch. It's called a 1/2 inch gouge, though. This is a Packard Woodworks gouge. Oh, and now we get to sanding, everybody's favorite part. I use a foam, that's actually a 3M sanding pad that I have never ever used for sanding. I cut it up and I use those for to wrap my sandpaper around. I find it distributes the pressure from the sandpaper evenly, or more evenly than my fingers do. So I don't get hot spots and uneven sanded spots on surfaces, and I have a bunch of them that I've cut to different sizes, and we've just skipped through. That was 120 grit we've just skipped through, and I think I'm about to start 400 grit. I would normally do 120, 180, 220, 320, and 400. I also raise the grain before I do the last pass with the 400 grit. And I'm only going to 400 grit because I'm going to dye this at the end, and that will leave the grain open enough to accept the dye the way I like it. So one of the things about raising the grain is that when you wet the surface, I find it shows me places where I might have problems either with finish or dye being accepted later, because the water will absorb differently, just like finish or dye would. And it also gives me an idea of where I might need to do more work on either sanding or actually even going back and recutting the surface. Something that I may not have seen or felt. I do a spin dry, and there you can see where it's dry in one area and then it's wet here. This area is going to absorb more finish, and this is not surprisingly the end grain. And then there's one spot right here that I probably didn't get sanded to the same level as the other areas. So I've gone back and done that, and now we're back at 400 grit, and I'm just lightly taking off the nibs that get raised when you raise the grain with water. And normally we will do the whole thing again on the other side. But you're lucky I didn't put that video in. So we won't watch that again. It's basically the same process.
Jonah, if you were comfortable, you could do both front and back in one setup if you were comfortable turning on the
Yeah,
headstock side.
I could, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't have enough room at the headstock side of my lathe to do that comfortably. I would end up whacking my elbow. I've tried doing it before, and I find it more comfortable to just turn it around.
You can always use a Morse taper extension to get you more room with your stub center.
Oh yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought of that, but I don't have one at the moment. But I find that the headstock really gets in my way when I try turning from the other side. So I end up just turning the piece around. But that's a good point. I'll have to look into an extension, because there are times when it would be much better for me to leave other pieces that I'm doing just between centers where they are, and then just turn it around, or not to have to turn it around and just turn from the other side.
Number 2 to a number 2 extension at Packard Tools, like 14 bucks.
Oh, cool. Okay. I'll have to take a look for that. Thank you. Yeah, because with this, runout isn't really a problem. I mean, the amount of runout that I would get from an extension like that isn't really going to be a problem. You can see the spindle bearings on my tail center. Runout is really not an issue. So now I'm at the point on the other side where I've turned it to rough shape, and I'm just trying to get in and get the other side, the two sides, to more or less match. And again, I'm not going for an absolute match. I don't have templates or anything. I'm just eyeballing it. I'm looking at the profile, the ghosts of the two edges, what will become the box body when it as it turns, and I'm looking at the ghosts of the profile here of the rim that I've already turned to completion, and I'm just trying to match them roughly by eye. And I'm watching I'm watching up here, whoops, as I turn, I'm watching this part. I'm not watching where the gouge is necessarily. I'm kind of going back and forth so that I know where I'm cutting, but I also can see the shape that I'm cutting. And here I'm just refining, doing the last bit of refining on the second side of the saucer. And the two sides by this point are pretty well aligned. I'm just refining the curve. Oh yeah, and I wear a full face shield when I turn. If you noticed that when I stuck my head under the camera. So I'm just checking for areas that might have a little lump or a bump and marking them with pencil so I can go back and shave them off. It just makes it a little bit easier to see them that way. All right, now I'm taking off the edges on the rim. And for that, I'm using it looks like I'm using my detail gouge there. And that's just a Sorby spindle gouge that over the years I've managed to turn into a detail gouge because it was convenient for the kind of turning that I do. And I'm also using my bull gouge here. Or no, I'm sorry, that's still the spindle gouge. I do use the bull gouge at some point, I believe, in this to do a little bit more to it. That point makes it very convenient to get into places. I have less of a risk of catch because there's so little edge for it to touch, for it to latch onto. Yeah, now I'll do a little bit of shear scraping around the rim just to refine that curve a little bit and refine the surface. And it's not a particularly difficult multi-axis project, and we're here for sanding again. And I'll do the same 120, 180, 220, 320, 400, and I'll raise the grain again with the 400. This is a not particularly difficult multi-axis project. It's very, you've got two axes and the turning is not, you're not turning a lot of air, you're turning air, but it's not like 90% air. And that's it that's basically the rim roughed out. And I'll refine the rim some more as I'm working on the box section. I've left myself enough room to play around with if I decide to go back and change the rim, which I end up doing. So now we move on to the saucer body. I've drilled a 1 1/8 inch hole about 3/16 of an inch deep with a Forstner bit to mount it on the 25mm jaws of my chuck. And now I will turn the
Is the hole perpendicular to the original face?
Yes, the hole is on the true center, so it's perpendicular to the original face of the bowl. So it's perpendicular to this face. And this will be the opening of the box eventually. I do this, I'm not going to hollow the box immediately. You'll see this as I keep going with this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the shape of the compartment on both sides, and then I'm going to go back and hollow, because what I don't want to do is reverse turn the bottom on the rim of my box opening. I don't want to risk damaging that rim and then not having a good enough mount point to go back and fix it. So it seems a little bit longer, but for me it ends up working out a little bit better. And a lot of it is going to depend on the equipment that you use and what your jaws are and how good a turner you are and stuff. I turn for effect. I have a particular thing in mind when I'm turning, so my technique is not always the greatest, but it gets done what I need it to. So this is the process that's worked for me. If you have a different process that works for you, that would be fine. You know, there's no one hard true way of doing this. So I switched to the overhead view so that you could see how I am coming in with the bowl gouge just to take out, and you can see the wobble on the rim. The camera makes it look like a figure eight, but in reality, all you see is the ghost. It looks like a wide, translucent or half transparent rim. So again, I'm just coming in with my long grind bowl gouge, and I'm gradually refining the curve of the surface. The box body is going to tip into the rim on one edge and pop out of the rim on the other edge because of the tilt. So basically I'm just making that curve and trying to bring everything in. And this is also sped up. I think I sped up almost all of the turning by about 2.5 times. So the lathe is at about, again, at about 650 RPM, maybe 700 RPM. And then back to the faceplate. That's basically the first cuts that I did with from the overhead camera. You can see how even with that shallow doming, you're already getting the inset and the pop out based on the offset rim. I think I left this section at normal speed because I'm going to get a catch really soon. And I wanted you to see it because, you know, it's a thing. And it's good to see how it happens. And you actually can see how it happens between the faceplate camera and the overhead camera. You know, and it's something that particularly with a surface like this that's got a fairly complex edge going on here, it's easy to get a catch. And I should have changed, what I should have done was change tools. I should have gone to my detail gouge. What's going on here is I'm refining this outer edge. I'm taking off more of the rim to open up some room for the box a little bit. And what I should have done right here is switch to the detail gouge instead of the bowl gouge. You know, it's fine right now. That's actually the cut that I wanted to make. I'm just taking down more of this little bump here along the outer edge. But I think it's coming up here. And I have too much edge, too much curve on the edge of that bowl gouge, and it's at the wrong angle. And I think what happened was I caught the part of the up curve on the edge. Not yet. It's coming. It's coming. And I would blame that I'm paying attention to the fact that I have the cameras and everything, but really I think I lapse and I wasn't thinking, you know, it's just one of those things. Yeah, I'm out too far. Yep, right there. I'm out too far. And I got myself a lovely spiral jaggy. No, I know none of you have ever had them, so I thought I would show you what one looks like.
Now you're not going to duplicate what you said when that happened?
No, I'm not. I was actually aware that the camera was on and I was a lot more refined. Yeah, and you can see I ran this, I actually did this in slow time so that you could see it happen from the overhead camera, because right there, and I have the gouge, the face is too closed and I caught the upswing part of the tip of the gouge. And it was actually really interesting to go back and watch it happen on video. Again, this is the first time I've done video at my workshop, so it's been quite a learning experience for me. But anyway, I left it in there so that, you know, you guys could see what a catch looks like, because I am absolutely certain you are all much better turners than I am and have never seen a catch. So you should see what one looks like. So now I have to remount the bowl, or remount on the rim centers. And I always make a point to not remove my mount points until I absolutely have to. I leave them as long as I possibly can, and I will go out of my way to leave them as long as I possibly can, so that if something like this happens in whatever project I'm doing, I can go back and do stuff. And you'll see here, I actually don't have the one on the back because I had to drill through it for the Forstner bit, but I can line it up close enough. And again, this is hard landing, not perfect landing. So the rim doesn't have to line up perfectly on the other center, but I managed to get it pretty close. And I'm just watching to see where the rim is, you know, that it's lined up. And this is extremely sped up. So now I'm going to go in and turn off the catch. I'm just gonna, I left myself extra space on the rim, so it's not a big deal. And I've switched to the overhead shot because it will be easier to see what I'm taking off than it will be on the faceplate. I'm basically going to just come in and take out this area. I'm basically just returning the rim on this side. And I want to do this before I finish turning the box section, because I want to know what I have left to work with. One of the things I like about multi-axis turning, at least for me, is I rarely plan too much about what I'm doing. I have an idea. I know sort of what I want, but I don't have it mapped out in exquisite detail. So it's something that I can do on the fly. It's something that as things happen, I can change what I'm doing and adapt. And I like the freedom of that, which is funny because my formal training is in electrical engineering, and I worked for a number of years as an engineer, and I worked to spec, you know, all kinds of specs. So now I think I'm in my rebellious phase where I don't like specs anymore. But anyway, yeah, I've just taken off the unintended spiral cut. And now we're going back on the recess, and I'm going to finish turning the box section on the top. This is going to end up being the top of the box because it's the side that doesn't have any of the darker grain on it. So we've got an extra little crinkle in the rim, which, you know, hard landing. So it's had a fender bender. We're good. Boy, Tom, your cat seems to be enjoying herself.
She likes these meetings, I think.
I suspect she does. And if you're wondering, I'm using a Sorby, I forget what they call it exactly. You can change out the tool rest on the tool post. It's a post and you can get a series of rests. I really like this setup. You have to be careful to tighten it up properly. Otherwise you'll be turning and all of a sudden the tool rest is trying to unscrew itself, which is no fun. But I like the round bar for doing this kind of thing because I can angle my gouge in all kinds of ways. So yeah, this is just refining the shape of the central section for the box. The box itself isn't going to be very big. It's meant to be functional, but it's only going to be big enough to hold maybe a pair of earrings or a ring or a necklace, you know, like a chain or something. It's not meant to be a fully hollowed, thin-walled structure. As it is, when I do the bottom, I need to leave enough meat to insert, to drill tenon holes to put the legs into eventually. So the box itself, I want to be heavy and stable. It's meant to be functional. It's meant so that you can lift the lid with one hand and the box doesn't come with you. And you can fish around in it with the other hand to get out your whatever you put in there. Yeah, now I've decided I'm going to refine the rim a little bit more. And I've marked the center, at least on that face that I was using. So for a piece like this, I'll go back and forth several times just to refine the shape that I'm getting. It's quite freeform. I find it almost relaxing, except when I get a catch. And then yes, foul language does ensue. It's good that I live in the woods. Nobody can hear me when I swear at the top of my lungs.
How much of the design do you plan ahead on, or how much do you just let start turning and see what comes out?
That depends on what I'm doing. There are times when I just put a piece on the lathe and see what happens. Generally, I have an idea of what I want to do with whatever piece of wood I'm putting on the lathe, or I've sketched something that I want to try to produce. Even with multi-axis stuff, I will do some sketches to at least in my head get an idea of what it might look like. I don't know why my camera tried to refocus there. What it might look like, but a lot of it does happen freeform, and I suppose part of it is just that I haven't done this enough to have a full vocabulary of cuts and angles and stuff in my head. But it's also, as I said, I was an engineer for many years, and I am kind of rebelling against specs and specifics and things. So a lot of how planned out my work is depends very strongly on what I'm actually trying to produce. If I'm producing a piece of furniture, which I don't do anymore. I used to make furniture when I was younger and could toss wood around my workshop with impunity. I was very precise. I had very detailed drawings, and I had measured everything out, and which you have to do with furniture, because otherwise when you sit on it, it will fall down, or when you put something in it, it will fall down, and that's bad. But I'm a little bit freer with my turnings. Once in a great while, if there's something that absolutely has to be a certain way, I will make a template. But other than that, no. And just, I want to comment here, I'm using the detail gouge to get in and refine this curve a little bit more, where the rim and the box body meet. And this is why I say, this is what I should have done instead of using the bowl gouge before. I should have come in with the detail gouge, because you see how narrow that point is? There's almost no way I can get a catch with this detail gouge unless I just shove the tip into the wood. I have much more control when I'm doing a multi-axis piece when I'm using that detail gouge. Just the tip of that detail gouge. For this, because I'm I'm using a piece that I've already done as a model, I actually do have to pay some attention to what it looks like, and I can't be completely freeform, but it's not going to end up looking exactly like the one that I turned in 2013. It's slightly different. It obviously looks similar. You would tell that the two pieces are related to each other, but it isn't identical by any stretch of the imagination. The older one has more lumps to it. It has more dips. And I think I may have actually, I don't remember if I turned it, I don't think I did 3 axes. I think I only did 2, but I think I ended up turning it twice on one of the axes for one of the components, so it ends up intersecting again in a different way. So yeah, the detail gouge makes my life a lot easier when I'm doing these kinds of turnings. And if you do want to take a stab at doing one of these, I would suggest finding something small and pointy that you can do similar things with, because it really reduces the risk of a catch quite a lot. Ironically, I don't like using the carbide detail cutters. I have 2. I have one that's got a really, really sharp point on it, which scares the living daylights out of me because it's grabby as anything. And I have one that's got a slightly, very, very tiny radius tip on it, which I like better, which I will use for certain things when I have no other choice, because I can't get in there with the spindle gouge. But generally, I prefer using my little detail gouge. I've had this for years. I think this is one of the first turning tools I got. And I'm ground down to the point where I'm starting to think about, I ought to get another one so I can start grinding it to get the same shape out of it. So I have one to replace it when this one is done. So as you can see, it's a slow process of turn a little, look at it, turn a little, look at it, refine it, try not to lose a finger, refine it some more. Yeah, and I do stop a lot to check the progress of my turning. Again, this is at probably 650 or 700 RPMs. It's not, I don't think I've ever turned really, really fast. I don't think I've ever taken my lathe off the slow pulleys, you know? I prefer to turn more slowly generally, or slower RPM, and just make sure my tools are really sharp. Yeah, yes, I like turning it fast enough for me. And again, I'm now starting to sand, and I'm going to blend in the edges between the rim and the box body. I'm starting at 120. I'm using my sanding pad as a backer again. I find that I think those are neoprene, and I find that they have just the right amount of stiffness to support the sandpaper and just the right amount of softness and flexibility to get into curves. So. I wish I could sand this fast in real life. I do usually turn down the speed on the lathe when I'm sanding. I turn it down. I've probably turned this down to about 500 RPM now, actually, to minimize heat buildup, because I don't want to scorch the wood in places. It ends up screwing up how the finish gets absorbed. So I'm fairly careful about pressure and speed when I'm sanding. I tend to use a light pressure and let the sandpaper do the work instead of trying to force it in. So I won't bore you with all of the sanding grits. Assume I went through up to 400. Now I'm drilling I'm going to drill a recess to mount this so that I can turn the underside of the saucer. And I realized that, you know, again, you could hollow here, and I have on other pieces hollowed before doing this and then reversed and expanded my chuck into the rim. And I just don't want to take the risk of damaging that rim by reverse chucking using the rim. So I'm going to do the underside first, and then I will remount it on the recess on the back and hollow. And this is my detail gouge, because I am going to, or my detail carbide tip, because I'm going to put a little dovetail in that recess, because I am going to be hollowing. Or sorry, not hollowing. I am going to be I do want it to sit tightly on the jaws. I'll refresh the recess and the little dovetail here when I reverse it to actually do the hollowing. Yeah, so this is the back. The process is basically the same as the front. I'm taking off the excess wood to leave the box body. This recess will eventually be capped by the engine, which is a little dome-shaped piece with a tenon on the back that just sits in that recess. And I have pictures of that. I actually don't have the video for that because it would have made this run extremely long. So I have pictures of the engine that I will show later. This side went a lot more smoothly than the other one did. So hopefully this isn't boring you all to tears. And again, it's the same process as on the front side. I don't care particularly if the top and the bottom don't match perfectly. It's not meant to be symmetrical. It's a flying saucer. It's had a hard landing. It doesn't have to be perfectly matched top and bottom. So that takes a little bit of the pressure off for doing this also. I mean, you could figure out a way, you could do templates, or you could figure out how to match everything top and bottom. And I've done other pieces where I do want it to match and it's finicky because there's always the risk of a catch, or you cut a little bit too much and then I have to go back and I have to remount and match the front and the back. I have done that before with other pieces. This just doesn't happen to be one of them. Excuse me. So now I took off a little bit of the rim of this hole. So now I'm realigning it so that I'm sure the holes line up perfectly so I don't have a sloppy center. And I'm gonna re-drill this. I'm gonna make it just a little bit deeper. And then I'll recut the dovetail so it sits on the jaws, and then we'll go to hollowing. So yeah, this is where I cut the recess for the dovetail jaws. Yeah, I'm just freshening this up since I've re-drilled the hole a little bit deeper. I want to make sure those jaws get good purchase because when I hollow this, I do not want it flying off the chuck and going all over the shop. Because I have had that happen, and it's very annoying to be, 8 hours into a piece and have it fly off the lathe. So now we're going to hollow. First thing I'm going to do is drill a 1/2 inch diameter hole down about probably 1 inch, 1.25 inches into the body. That's going to be roughly the depth of my box, and that serves two purposes. It gives me a depth marker so that I don't go too far and end up making a funnel. And it also, I'm going to be hollowing this with a carbide cutter, round carbide cutter, so it gives the carbide cutter something to grab onto as I'm hollowing, and you'll see that when I start cutting. And I'm going to just use a larger Forstner bit to set my opening. This is, I think, a 1 3/4 inch bit. I just want it to go in about 1/4 inch, and it sets the opening that I want. I think I went in about maybe 3/8 inch, 5/16, something like that. So this is it's just a round carbide cutter. And I really like these for hollowing because I can basically use the cutting edge to just draw the shape that I want the internal, the box to be. Yeah, I'm literally just almost tracing out the dimensions of what I want as I cut and the shape of what I want as I cut. This is one of the Carter Axe carbide tools, which I really like the shaft on it because it's got a flat on the bottom, but it's also mostly round, so you can shear cut. And I end up tipping my carbide cutter and rounding it that way a lot. Ironically, normally what I would do if I didn't have the camera set up, if I really wanted to undercut the rim of the box, I would stand on the back side of the lathe and come in with the tool from the back and turn from here because I'd get a better angle and I have better control over the tool. As it is, I'm kind of hanging over the lathe with the tool doing this kind of thing. And the cameras make that impossible though, because the stands are right there. But I saw Graham Priddle do that at a symposium. I think it was the Connecticut Symposium in 2010. It just kind of blew my mind. It's like, you could stand on the backside of the lathe and turn? Really? It just opened up a whole new world for me in hollowing. So I'm basically going for a rounded shape in the box. There's nothing magical about it. I want it rounded because, again, this is supposed to be usable. So if you put something in there, I don't want it getting caught in a hard corner. I want to be able to scoop it out with one hand, one finger. So what I care about is getting a smooth surface, a smooth curve in there without any places that an item can get hung up on. And now I'm trying to get rid of that little nib at the bottom of the center that just never wants to go away. So now we're on to sanding, and I have another, again, 120 to 400 in all the steps, and I have another cut down bit of that 3M sanding pad that I use for interior stuff. And I'm turning the speed down pretty far on the lathe. This is at about maybe 400, 450 RPM tops. I don't remember what I had it set to, but I usually put it around 400, 450. I'm just easing the edge on the rim so it's not sharp. I'm going in underneath, and I've undercut the rim just a little bit, just enough to give a nice shadow line and to give a little bit of space so the box opens out inside. Because that also allows you, if you've got a little undercut there, you can go in with your finger and hook and pull out whatever you want, and the rim will hold it in so it doesn't fly across the room on you. And now I'm using a wet paper towel to raise the grain on the interior. Same as before, I've done all my sanding, and this is just the last step.
Just do a quick, is a time check. It's 8:15. So you
Okay.
have another 20 minutes, half an hour. Or,
Yeah, this will be done very shortly. I think we've got about 10 minutes, 8 minutes, something like that.
I'm not trying to rush you. If people are sticking around, keep going.
No, this runs for about another 8 minutes. I hit the camera. I realize when my face mask is up, I have a tendency to whack the camera with it. This is, I'm going to do the dye now. This is blue and lemon yellow trans tint dye mixed together to get me my nice spring green, and it's just in denatured alcohol. Sometimes if I'm doing using dye, I will add a little bit of shellac to it to let it actually start to build up a finish, just a little bit. This I've just got just alcohol and the dye because I want it to soak in completely. And I'm going to go back and touch up the areas of grain that don't absorb the dye as well as other parts do. I'm not going to get a perfectly even color. That's just not going to happen. But I am going to touch it up so that I can get more dye into some areas. And I found that the first coat, when everything is really wet, seems to absorb the best, even when it's just alcohol and dye as opposed to alcohol, shellac, and dye. It just seems to penetrate the most. So I try to keep it as wet as I can and get as much color in there as I can with this first coat. So you can see I'm starting to touch some of the areas that are a little bit lighter, where it didn't absorb the dye as well. And you can see I do this a lot on my lathe. My lathe is brightly colored. I'm now doing the interior. And I'm using just a folded up chunk of paper towel to do the inside. My lathe is set as slow as it will go. I think this is at 48 RPM. I think that's the slowest I can get my lathe to go. So if I couldn't do it that slow, or if I need to go slower, I'll just turn stuff by hand. Turn the piece by hand on the lathe. But there, I'm just touching up the areas that haven't absorbed the dye as well. And this is the first of 2 applications of dye. I'll let this dry completely, and then I'll come back and do another coat to particularly to touch up the lighter areas. If you needed to lighten alcohol-based dye, you can come back with a pad moistened with just denatured alcohol and wipe it over, and you will actually lift color. I've done that before too, both intentionally and for special effects and stuff. Between coats, I'm using a little piece of Scotch-Brite gray, which I think is the equivalent of like 600 grit or 4/0 steel wool, to just take off any grain that's been raised by the alcohol soaking into the wood and raising the fibers. There's not very much. I just want it to be an even surface. I want the surface to be as even as I can make it so it will absorb dye as evenly as I can get it to, barring the changes in grain. Between edge grain and face grain and end grain. And I have the speed there at about maybe 200 RPM. Yeah, and here I'm coming back with the second application of the dye. And I'm focusing primarily on the spots that didn't absorb as much the first time around. And you can see a darker area here. That's probably, it's either very wet or it's edge grain. And then here's the face grain. or facier grain. I don't know. So now I'm going to come in with a marker and put a pinstriping detail in the rim where the box body and the rim meet. And I end up going back later and doing this with a lime green Sharpie, but I didn't have a lime green Sharpie at the time. So I ended up doing it with the first coat with a metallic green ink acrylic marker, I think it is. I forget what the brand name is. I got that at Dick Blick or Amazon or something like that. And now to do the back side, I'm going to do the pinstriping on the underside as well. And I don't want to mount it on the rim. So I made this faceplate thing. I have a faceplate and a plywood disc. And this is a cork trivet that I've just got double stick tape to the plywood. The plywood supports it. The cork is soft enough that I can use this just to push it up and it doesn't damage my wood. You know, even if I'm doing something like poplar, which is fairly soft, I'm not using so much pressure that I'm going to make a mark, and the cork has a little bit of a tooth to it, so it will hold things in place. It has a little bit of give to it. So this has actually worked out pretty well. And I think I got the cork trivet at Craft Supplies or something. You can get them at most any woodworking place that sells project supplies. Now we're on to the finish. I'm using Liberon oil. I did 4 coats. The first coat is the soak coat, where I try to get as much oil on here and get it to suck up as much oil as it can. Let it sit for a few minutes and then wipe it off. Go back and do 2 more coats, light oil, and then wipe it off when it gets too much. And then for the 4th coat, I'm going to take a barely damp rag and wipe it on as evenly as possible and not wipe it off. And then I will get a very shiny surface that doesn't look like plastic, and it doesn't feel like a varnish sitting on a surface. It ends up looking pretty good. The finish actually came out really good this way. The oil will take up some of the green color in the dye, and it will take up some of the marker, so don't rub too hard. You know, you're just applying the oil, don't burnish it in. But it doesn't take up a ton, and I will go back. As I said, I end up going back with Sharpie, but I would have, even if I hadn't, I would have gone back and refreshed the pinstriping after I finished the oil and let it dry out for however many days it takes for it to cure. I think it's like 3 days or something for it to do a full cure. But yeah, so this is the first coat. Now I'm going to go back and wipe off the excess before it's set up. They say on the can that it takes about 10 minutes for it to set up. I find it's more like 5 or 6. So you have to be kind of speedy with the Liberon. I like this. I like water locks. And when I used to make jewelry boxes, I used a lot of tried and true varnish oil, and I've been thinking about going back to using that on the lathe. I haven't yet, though. So anyway, that's it. I have another piece just in case, but that's, you know, for the antenna part. But
How long is that?
let's see, 439 megabytes. I think it's about 15 minutes.
Yeah, why don't you go for it? We only lost 1 person so far.
Okay. Well, if you're not bored silly.
No, this is
a still that I put at the beginning. I cast these resin cones. This is going to be for the tip of the antenna on the lid of the box. This is basically the finial, the tip of the finial for the lid of the box. And this area, this is 2-part epoxy resin. It's called Naked Fusion. It's got a 40-minute working time, demold time in 24 hours, 72 hours to full cure. I dyed the resin green to begin with, and what I did was I put some resin into a cone mold that I have, and then put a couple of drops of alcohol ink, green alcohol ink, into the top. And then I poured more resin with green glow-in-the-dark powder mixed in through the green alcohol ink so that the resin would start to blend. I didn't want an even uniform color. I wanted it to look a little bit turbulent. You can see it a little bit better in this one over here. You can see a little bit of the darkness than you can in this one. The glow-in-the-dark powder is heavier than the resin, so eventually it's all going to sink to the tip. So if you just do clear resin and glow-in-the-dark powder, you're going to have clear resin at the top with maybe a little bit of glowy stuff, and then all the glowy part is going to be down in the tip, and it looks really weird. So that was why I ended up coming up with the green tint, because it's going to be green glow-in-the-dark powder, the green tint, it works. It looks pretty cool when it's done. I'll have a picture of it at the end. But yeah, so this is about attaching this to the finial. Basically, I'm going to use a loose tenon to attach the cone to my dowel rod that I turn into the finial. So right now I'm using a nail to scribe a center. I'm using my little center finder to find the center of the cone. I'm just using a nail to scribe the center, and then I'm going to hand drill into that center mark to get a hole big enough for me to just stick a little tip of a 1/8 inch dowel into it, just to support it on the tip of the finial. I'm just reinforcing the line there. Resin is really easy to drill by hand. This one is anyway. I don't know about other brands. I haven't used other brands yet. So in fact, I'm using the tip of the nail that I scribed with to get a starter hole going in, to get a little divot there so that the drill will seat. And I'm going to drill, as I said, by hand I've got a loose drill chuck, small drill chuck, and I'm going to go 1/16 of an inch, 3/32 of an inch, and then 7/64 and 9/64. And I want the hole to be about maybe 1/4 of an inch deep in the cabochon. Do not ever do this by holding the cabochon in your hands and having a power drill, because those edges on the cone here are stupid sharp. You will lose your fingertips if the drill catches at all and starts to spin. The tops of your fingertips will fly off. It'll make a mess, and you'll ruin all of your work with blood. So don't do that. That's why I'm doing it by hand. That's a really cheap chuck that I got, I think I got it from Lee Valley or something a while ago. It's meant to go into a hand drill to hold small drills, but it also works just to give me a little bit more support when I'm hand drilling out things like this. And the resin, it drills really easily. It's very easy to do this by hand. It doesn't take very long. I've sped this up just because I'm slow turning it, but it's very easy. You get nice shavings out of it. Just wait until the resin is fully cured. Don't try to do this when the resin has only been curing for 24 hours or 48 hours. Wait for the full cure. I think I did these over a week before I started drilling them and working on them. You really want the resin to harden up. And this is going to be my loose tenon. I've dyed it to match the saucer just because I had the dye on hand and I wanted it to be green in there instead of having that like a really obvious light colored dowel in there. You can still see it a little bit, but it's not quite as bad. And I'm going to use super glue eventually to, thick super glue to put the two pieces together with the dowel. So now I need to get a hole into my antenna dowel, or the dowel that I'm going to use to make the antenna, the finial. And that's easy. That's a drill chuck. So this is again a 9/64 diameter hole for the dowel that I'm going to be using. I'm just going in, I'm going to go in about, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch, something like that. I don't want to go in too far because my finial is going to narrow right around here, and I don't want it to be too weak. So I'm trying to not go in too far. So these go together like that. And that should reinforce that joint so it's not just a super glue wood joint at the end of the finial. And now it's tomorrow. And I'm using a carbide radius square cutter to reshape that cone into the shape that I want for the tip of the antenna, or the finial, whatever you want to call it. I'm turning at about 600 RPM, I think. Not very fast. Heat is your enemy when you're working with resin. If you are turning too fast or you put too much pressure on it, it will start to, you run the risk of it getting gummy. So I really try to keep things slow and light pressure. And I do have the dust collection going. I've got a little thingy down here that is attached to a hose and sucks in dust. And what this resin, I don't know how other resins turn, but this one seems to turn particularly well. I've done some other stuff with cabochons, and you can see the little glow in the dark, but I've done some other stuff with cabochons for inserts, and I've reshaped them. I try to cast things close to the shape that I want, and then I reshape them on the lathe. And it seems to turn really nicely. Now I'm wet sanding, and wet sanding does two things. It cools the resin while you're sanding so it doesn't overheat, and it also keeps the dust down, which is more important. So I do 320, 400, and 600 grit, and then I'm going to go to a polishing compound, to the Novus 3 polishing compound, to bring it up to full gloss shine. And obviously I have sped this up tremendously. The sanding process and the polishing process takes quite a while. It is tedious. And you can trade off. You could go to a higher grit sandpaper, but I find just going to 600 and starting with the Novus 3 works pretty well. If you do use these polishing compounds, make sure you pay attention to the manufacturer's recommendations for safety and how to use them and stuff, because some of them are kind of nasty. You can get surface irritation, or even the fumes can be not good for you. I have a pretty well ventilated shop just naturally, and I have an exhaust fan that can ventilate my shop quickly when I have all the windows open. Anyway, back to the polish. I'm going through all three stages of the Novus polish. The third stage is, or stage 3 is heavy scratches, stage 2 is medium scratches, and stage 1 is basically your final polish. So I spent a fair amount of time with the stage 3 to get it down, and now this is the stage 2. And you can see it's starting to get up a pretty good gloss. And now the 1 is kind of a spray. I spray a little bit on a paper towel, and I'm using paper towels here, not rags, to apply the polish. Now that's all set up. I'm actually turning the antenna, the finial. Again, this is sped up. I'm turning it about 700, 750 RPMs, maybe a little bit higher. I might have gone up to 800, 850. And I'm just getting a shape that will be comfortable to use. This isn't going to break. This isn't going to be a delicate finial. It's meant to be used. It's meant to be the lift on the lid. So I want it to be something that gives you purchase when you go to pick it up, and that isn't going to snap easily. A lot of my wood turnings are actually spaceships. And I used to make these very delicate nose finials on them. And I ship my work all over the country to shows and things. And I got back so many pieces that I had to redo the finial because they weren't packed properly when they were coming back. You know, if they didn't sell, the people who were packing the art to send back didn't pack it properly to protect the finial. So I ended up going to a slightly thicker finial in the end. But I used to make these really, really delicate finials. I just got tired of having to fix them all the time. So anyway, this one is not even remotely delicate. It is sturdy and meant to be used. I'm just giving myself a little relief here before I shape the lower part of the finial. So nothing earth-shattering here. It's just kind of a simple teardrop finial with a little fillet up at the top and the cup underneath the cone, or the cup underneath the glow-in-the-dark cone tip there. Now I'll reduce my, that's going to be the tenon that goes into the lid, reduce that more, although it's not to the final size yet because I'm going to sand. I've already sanded this, I just didn't do it on the video. And now I'm going to ink this because I want this to be black. This is Speedball India ink. I love India ink for ebonizing wood. It works really well, it's cheap, and it looks good. It's got a nice matte finish, and you can actually build up coats with it because India ink has a little bit of shellac in it. So you have to be careful because it will reactivate itself when you apply subsequent coats, but you can also treat it almost like a finish in and of itself. You can actually get some really stupendously nice matte finishes with good India ink. Different India inks will behave differently. I usually use either Speedball or Dick Blick's. I like the Speedball stuff better because it's darker, it coats faster, but the Dick Blick is super cheap and I don't care if I put on 2 coats of it. And it has better working properties for certain things. So here you can see I'm trying to touch up an area where the super glue stained the joint between the cone and the wood, so the ink isn't absorbing well. And right now I'm just taking the ink off the cabochon, and I'm going to go back with my old friend Sharpie to cover up the super glue area. This is going to get an oil finish also, so the Sharpie will not be lifted by the oil. At least it hasn't been in my experience. And that's my antenna. That's basically it. And it does glow in the dark.
Fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. And that's it for that. And then just part's not covered in the demo. This is what the engine looks like. I shut off all the lights in my workshop to try to get the glow to show up on the camera. It sort of does, but my camera tried desperately to make believe that the lights were still on and adapted to the darkness. So this is what the engine part looks like in the bottom recess on the saucer. The little glow-in-the-dark cabochons. And there'll be legs sticking out of here. But the piece isn't done yet, so I don't have completed pictures, unfortunately. I was hoping to have it done for tonight, but I ran into a problem, so I didn't. But, oh, and this is, I'm fitting the legs with I'm using dowels, and basically I need to measure the difference in length between this dowel and these dowels, and that will give me the offset that I need to allow for when I make the actual legs. Because I want the rim to sit parallel to the surface, to this surface, and the box to be tilted. So, but that's it. I hope I didn't bore you too badly. I hope the video wasn't too bad.
No, that was great.
Very, very good.
Very nice. Lots of
So,
fun. Thank you.
thank you for having me.
Nice job.
Thank you, John.
Good job, thanks.
Great job.